He thought it was just another ordinary school morning, until the quiet girl at the back of the bus wiped her tears. Again. Day after day she sat in silence, clutching her worn-out backpack, until one afternoon he found a note tucked beneath her seat. And everything changed. What he uncovered that day didn't just save her life. It brought his own heart back to life, too. If you believe in second chances, in the quiet power of kindness, and in stories that warm the soul, we'd love to have you here. Tap subscribe and join us for more true-to-the-heart stories like this one. Now, let's begin. Beckett Cole had driven the yellow bus down the same winding, frost-bitten mountain road every weekday morning for nearly 3 years. The roads changed with the seasons, muddy in spring, golden in fall, treacherous in winter, but the routine never did. He liked it that way. Routine was quiet. Routine didn't break your heart. It was early December, the kind of morning where the frost etched lace patterns onto the windshield, and every breath fogged the glass. Beckett, bundled in his worn green flannel and thermos in hand, did his final inspection of the bus. A sigh slipped out of him, a soft, tired thing. He didn't speak much these days, unless he had to. Not since Hannah. He climbed up into the driver's seat, glanced at the small framed photo clipped to his dashboard. Hannah holding baby June, her head tipped back in laughter, and turned the ignition. The engine rumbled to life like an old man stretching his back. Beckett adjusted the mirror, watched the empty rows behind him, and waited for the first stop. The kids piled in one by one. Some shouted hello, some barely mumbled. Most just trudged in with sleepy eyes and heavy backpacks. Beckett greeted each with a nod or a gentle morning. He knew most of their names, some of their stories. But there was one girl he didn't know much about. She always got on at the corner of Bellevue and Main. Thin coat, fraying cuffs, hat too big for her head, hair hanging in uneven strands as if cut with dull scissors. She looked about 9, maybe 10, though the way she curled into the last row of the bus made her seem smaller. What Beckett noticed first, weeks ago, was the silence. Most kids whispered, passed notes, argued over snacks. But she sat alone, never spoke. Her eyes were always cast downward. Some mornings, he thought he saw the shimmer of tears. This morning, it was clearer. Beckett spotted her through the rearview mirror as the bus rolled past the frozen pines and toward the ridge overlooking the old rail line. He saw her swipe quickly at her cheek with her sleeve. She wasn't just tired. She was crying. Quietly, deliberately, as if she'd had practice. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. He didn't say anything. Not yet. They arrived at the school, a low, aging building with a playground rimmed in ice. Children clattered down the aisle, laughing, pushing, jangling zippers and boots. But she stayed still in her seat. Beckett turned slightly. "Hey there. Time to head in." She blinked, startled, then nodded. Without a word, she slipped her backpack over one shoulder and hurried out. He watched her disappear through the school's double doors, swallowed by the crowd. Something tugged at him, something more than pity, a kind of familiar ache. Back at home, Beckett made toast for June. She was 7 now, sharp as a whip, more observant than most adults. She watched him as he buttered the toast in slow, even strokes. "Why do you look sad today?" she asked, sipping her juice. Beckett paused. "You know that girl who sits in the back of the bus? The one who's always quiet?" June nodded. "Willa. She doesn't talk to anyone. But she looks nice. Just sad." He looked at his daughter and gave a small smile. "Yeah, just sad." He didn't know why it lingered with him the way it did. He'd seen quiet kids before, lonely ones, but something about Willa, if that was her name, gnawed at him. That afternoon, the snowfall began. Flurries at first, then heavier. Beckett pulled the scarf Hannah had knitted years ago tighter around his neck and started the bus again. Same route, same stops. Familiar names and faces. The silence in the back row. When the kids filed out at the end of the day, Beckett did what he always did. Walked the aisle to check for forgotten hats, dropped gloves, stray lunch boxes. But today, he found something else. Under the seat where Willa always sat, folded carefully and pressed against the metal bar, was a piece of notebook paper. Crumpled at the edges, faint pencil lines inside. He almost left it alone, but something stopped him. He unfolded it slowly. The words were crooked, shaky, and small. If someone sees this, please help. My little brother can't make it through another night. Beckett stared at the note. The edges of the bus seemed to fall away. For a long moment he stood frozen, the paper trembling in his hand. Then he tucked it gently into his coat pocket, climbed back into the driver's seat, and picked up his phone. The note crinkled inside Beckett's coat pocket as he drove home that evening, but the words rang louder in his mind than the wheels crunching through snow. Please help. My little brother can't make it through another night. He must have reread it a dozen times at every red light, hands trembling slightly as he unfolded and refolded the paper, as if the meaning might change with each pass. But it didn't. It stayed exactly the same, desperate, childlike, and raw. At home, June ran out onto the porch before he even parked the truck. She was barefoot, again, on the wooden steps, her face alight like always. He stepped out and gave her the dad look, the one with eyebrows raised and head tilted. Feet, he said, nodding toward them. She grinned. The snow feels soft today. Want to try? Beckett half smiled, pulled off his gloves, and ushered her back inside. Normally, her laughter was enough to shake loose whatever clung to him, but tonight, her joy only made the ache worse. He warmed soup for dinner. June told him about a boy in her class who tried to lick the flagpole. She laughed at her own retelling, dramatically reenacting the teacher's panic. Beckett chuckled along, but his mind drifted. 2 children. Alone. One of them begging for help. He waited until June fell asleep, curled around her favorite stuffed rabbit, then went to the hall closet. From the top shelf, behind an old pair of hiking boots, he pulled down a wooden box. Inside, tax returns, Hannah's hospital papers, and his worn, outdated road atlas. He opened to the town map, Bellevue and Main, the intersection where the girl boarded the bus. He remembered her walking toward the stop from the north, always from the same stretch of back road, no other kids in sight. He didn't call the authorities. Not yet. He wasn't even sure what he would report. A note under a bus seat? It wasn't enough. Not for them. But it was enough for him. He dressed in layers, zipped his coat, grabbed a flashlight, and slipped into the quiet night. The drive took 13 minutes, long enough for doubt to creep in. What if it was just a prank? What if he was overstepping? What if she didn't want to be found? But when he pulled off the main road and turned onto the unpaved lane, something in his chest tightened. Trees lined both sides, tall and stark, their branches heavy with snow. His headlights barely touched the outline of a cabin ahead, tucked between the trees. No smoke from the chimney. No lights. He killed the engine and stepped into the crunch of snow. The porch creaked under his boots. There was no doorbell. He knocked twice, firmly. No answer. He knocked again, heart pounding harder now. Then, a sound. Not from inside, but behind the house. He followed the sound around the corner, flashlight sweeping, a cracked basement window, a faint whimper. Then, "Don't hurt us!" a small voice cried out. Beckett froze. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm Beckett. I drive the school bus." Silence. Then the window creaked open. Willa's face appeared, streaked with dirt and tear tracks. "Micah's sick," she whispered, "and there's no more food." He knelt beside the window. "Can you open the door?" She hesitated, then disappeared. Moments later, the front door opened with a reluctant groan. Beckett stepped inside. The air was freezing. The living room was barely furnished. A small mattress in the corner, 2 sleeping bags, a few empty cans. On a thin blanket near the fireplace, a little boy lay curled into himself, pale and shivering. "How long have you been here?" Beckett asked softly. Willa didn't meet his eyes. "Mom died 3 weeks ago. She said Dad would come back. He didn't." Beckett's throat closed. He crouched beside the boy, Micah, no older than 6. Fever burned his skin. His lips were cracked. "Can he walk?" Beckett asked. Willa nodded. "Then we're leaving. Right now." He carried Micah in his arms and took Willa's hand as they made their way through the snow. The night was bitter, but their pace quickened with each step. When they reached the truck, he turned the heat on full blast and wrapped Micah in the extra quilt from the back seat. Willa sat silently beside her brother, eyes fixed on Beckett. "You're not taking us to the police?" she asked. "No," Beckett said quietly. "I'm taking you home." Back at the house, June had awoken and stood barefoot again at the door, wrapped in her fleece blanket. She blinked at the sight of Beckett carrying a boy and a strange girl in behind him. "This is Willa," Beckett said, "and her brother, Micah. They're going to stay here for a little while." June looked at him, then at them, then back again. She nodded once and held out her stuffed rabbit to Micah. "Do you want to sleep in my bed?" she asked. Micah, dazed and weak, nodded. June took his hand. No questions, no judgment, just kindness. Beckett exhaled, the breath shaking as it left him. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel so empty. Beckett stood in the doorway of his kitchen, watching as June guided Willa and Micah to sit at the small wooden table. The same table he had built a decade ago for Hannah, as a surprise anniversary gift. The table had seen baby food spills, coloring books, broken pencils, and birthday cupcakes. But it had never felt as full as it did now, even in its silence. Willa sat stiffly, eyes darting around the room like a deer that had wandered too far from the forest. Micah, still feverish, leaned his head against her arm, his breathing shallow but steady. June, calm as moonlight, went to the cabinet and retrieved 2 bowls. She didn't ask permission. She simply filled them with leftover chicken soup and set them gently on the table. Beckett opened his mouth to speak, to offer something, comfort, explanation, anything. But June beat him to it. "Do you like carrots?" she asked Micah softly. "They're squishy in soup. My dad makes them mushy on purpose." Micah blinked at her, then nodded once. "Good," she smiled. "They help fevers." Beckett turned back to the stove. He didn't trust his voice yet. He focused instead on warming more broth, on slicing the last piece of bread, on stirring something that didn't really need stirring. His hands needed to move. They had always known what to do when his heart didn't. Later that night, after Willa and Micah had been tucked into the guest bed, the one with the faded quilt and Hannah's hand-sewn pillowcases, Beckett stepped out onto the back porch. The snow had settled like a hush over the yard. The woods behind the house were dark and still. He held Hannah's old mug in his hands, now filled with lukewarm tea. The ceramic was chipped at the rim, but he couldn't bring himself to use anything else. He didn't hear the door open behind him, but he felt June's presence. She always walked gently. "She doesn't talk much," June said, wrapping her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "No," Beckett replied. "She doesn't. She reminds me of you." He glanced down at her. "How's that?" June shrugged. "You're quiet when something hurts." He let out a slow breath and leaned on the railing. Yeah, I guess I am. They stood there in companionable silence for a while, watching their breath fade into the cold. Will they stay? June asked. I don't know yet. Can they? He looked down into her wide, waiting eyes. Would you want them to? She didn't hesitate. They need us. Simple. Unquestioning. As if offering love was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it should be. Beckett reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. Then we'll try. The next morning, the world outside shimmered in pale gold as the sun fought its way through gray clouds. Inside, the house stirred with a new kind of quiet, the kind that came not from loneliness, but from uncertainty. Willa was already awake when Beckett came down the stairs. She sat at the kitchen table, her hair damp from a hasty sink rinse, her clothes neatly folded beside her. She looked up when he entered, eyes steady. You don't have to stay long, she said quickly, as if it was her job to make it easier for him. We can leave once Micah is better. You're not leaving yet, Beckett said calmly, pouring himself coffee. Micah still has a fever, and it's snowing again. Willa didn't argue, but her shoulders didn't relax either. Trust, Beckett knew, didn't bloom overnight. Your mom, he said after a moment. Was anyone looking after you when she passed? She shook her head. She told us not to tell anyone. She thought if the county found out, we'd get taken away. Micah's just 6. She didn't want him in some place alone. Beckett's stomach twisted. The fear in her voice wasn't abstract. It was born from something lived, something real. You're not going to be alone, he said gently. Willa's mouth pressed into a thin line, like she wanted to believe him but didn't know how. That afternoon, Micah's fever broke. Beckett had been checking on him every hour, and around 4 o'clock, he walked in to find the boy sitting up, blanket draped over his shoulders, blinking as if the world had come into clearer focus. I'm hungry, Micah said, voice hoarse. Beckett smiled and ruffled his hair. That's the best thing I've heard all week. They had grilled cheese sandwiches that night. Simple, warm, safe. June cut Micah's into 4 perfect triangles, and Willa poured the milk without being asked. For a moment, Beckett allowed himself to believe they could become something. Not perfect, not planned, but whole in their own way. Later, as he tucked Micah in beside June, who had insisted they all sleep in the same room that night, Beckett stepped back and looked at the scene. 2 girls, 1 boy, 1 quilt. It looked like family. He turned off the light, but not before glancing up at the photo on the wall. Hannah, smiling under a summer sky. He whispered to the quiet, You'd like them. Then he closed the door. Beckett didn't recognize the sound of the knock at first. It wasn't the usual impatient rap of a delivery driver or the soft flutter of a neighbor's visit. It was firm, intentional, the kind of knock that carried paperwork. He opened the door cautiously, expecting maybe a volunteer from a nearby shelter or someone selling winter firewood. But when he saw Lainey Harper standing on his porch, clipboard in hand, snow in her dark curls, time pulled taut like a bowstring. She looked older than the last time he saw her. Not old, just more grounded. The kind of woman who had carried weight others didn't see. She wore a thick navy coat and a pin that read, Douglas County Child Services. But it was her eyes, soft brown and focused, that gave away the real authority. Mr. Cole, she said. Beckett gave a slow nod. Lainey Harper. The way her name sounded on his tongue felt like opening a door that had long been closed. He remembered her from years ago, when Hannah had just passed. She was the social worker who'd visited their home, not once, but twice, to make sure June was safe. She hadn't pried, she hadn't lectured, but she had seen everything. The half-eaten meals, the unopened letters, the man who could barely lift his eyes from the floor. "You look better," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "Then what?" Laney's lips quirked. "Then last time, they sat in the kitchen. June, Willa, and Micah were outside building what might someday become a snowman." Beckett watched them through the frosted window as he poured Laney a mug of coffee. She accepted it with a grateful nod. "You're not on any emergency foster list." "No," he said. "I'm not." She pulled a folder from her bag and opened it. Willa Langford, age 9. Micah Langford, age 6. No known relatives. Their mother passed November 21st. Father unaccounted for. Beckett didn't flinch, though the dates hit like bricks. "I found a note on the bus," he said. "It was from Willa. I didn't know what else to do. I just drove there." "And brought them here?" "Yes." Laney looked around. Her eyes fell on the quilt over the couch, the crayon drawings tacked to the fridge, the muddy boots lined up by the door. 4 pairs now. She took a long sip of coffee and closed the folder. "Micah seems better?" "He's recovering. Slowly. He still sleeps curled up like a cornered animal." "That's normal," she said. So is Willa's silence. "She talks to June. Not much, but it's something." Laney leaned back slightly, searching his face. "You do realize what you've done is technically unlawful?" Beckett nodded. "I do. Most people wouldn't risk it. I wasn't thinking about the law when I found them." His voice was steady, but his hands tightened around the ceramic mug. "I was thinking about Hannah." Laney tilted her head, listening without interrupting. "She used to say," Beckett continued, "if we ever found a child left out in the cold, figuratively or not, we were morally obligated to bring them in. She was a teacher, wasn't she? She was everything." A quiet pause settled between them. Outside, the laughter of children cut through the winter air like birdsong. "I don't want to send them away," he said. "I didn't come here to take them," Laney replied. "Not today, but I do need to file a report." "Of course." She stood, walked slowly around the living room. Her fingers grazed the mantel, the photo of Hannah, the woodwork along the frame of the hallway. "This house, it has history." Beckett nodded. "I built it for her. And now? Now I'm trying to rebuild it. For them." Laney met his eyes. "It's not a bad foundation." That evening, after Laney left, Beckett lingered at the kitchen sink, washing the mugs slowly. June sat on the floor with Willa, carefully showing her how to string beads onto a bracelet. Micah snored softly on the couch, his breath finally even. Beckett dried the mugs, one by one, then opened the back door and stepped into the freezing air. The stars were beginning to appear, scattered and shy, behind thin wisps of cloud. He let his breath rise, watching it disappear. It reminded him of something Hannah used to say. "You can't keep the stars, Beck, but you can look for them. That's enough most nights." From behind him, a voice. "You think she'd be proud?" He turned. June stood there, wrapped in a blanket, same as always. "I hope so," he said. "She would," June said firmly. She was the kind of mom who would love kids that weren't even hers. Beckett's eyes stung. "She'd probably bake cookies and tell Willa it was okay to be quiet," June continued. "And she'd put Micah on her lap and teach him to read." He looked down at his daughter, so small, so wise. "You remember all that?" "I remember enough." That night, as the fire crackled and snow fell soft against the windows, Beckett sat in the living room long after the others had gone to bed. On the coffee table lay Laney's business card. On the back, a note written in her neat handwriting. "Call me if you need help fixing more than just broken windows." He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, and smiled. It was the first smile in a long time that didn't feel borrowed from someone else's memory. Snow had a way of silencing the world, not just muting sound, but softening thoughts too, making everything slower, more deliberate, like life itself had to pause and listen. That morning, Beckett stood by the front window, with a coffee cup clutched in both hands, watching June walk down the driveway toward the mailbox. The sky was pale, and the sun had yet to break through the clouds. A trail of tiny footprints followed her, like punctuation marks in fresh powder. She opened the mailbox, slipped something inside, and closed it with care, as if the metal box were a sacred altar. Then she stood still for a second, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Beckett tilted his head. What had she just mailed? When she returned, boots dusted with snow, he asked, "You didn't tell me you were sending a letter." June shrugged in that very specific way only children could, half innocence, half mischief. "I wasn't sure I had to." To whom? To someone who might care. He chuckled, but gently. "That's vague." June smiled. "Sometimes, so are miracles." She skipped away, humming to herself, as if she hadn't just uttered something profound enough to halt the breath in his chest. 2 days later, the letter arrived at Lainey Harper's desk. Her office was small, cluttered with binders, post-it notes, and a single fading pothos plant that somehow refused to die. The return address on the envelope stopped her mid-coffee sip. June Cole, Oak Hill Road. She slid it open carefully, unfolded the lined paper, and stared at the childlike scrawl. "Dear Ms. Harper, I know you're the lady who checks if kids are okay. I hope you check if grown-ups are okay too, because my dad is trying really hard. Willa and Micah need a safe house. We have one. It's not fancy, but it smells like cinnamon, and my dad sings when he washes dishes. He doesn't know I hear him. If you want to come check, that's okay. But please don't take them away, unless you really have to. I think they belong here now. Thank you for caring. Love, June Cole, age 7.5 but almost 8. Lainey sat in silence for several minutes. The edges of the letter were wrinkled. A tiny smear of grape jelly stained the bottom corner. It was perfect. Back at the Cole home, Beckett noticed a change in Willa. It was subtle at first, the way she began sitting a little straighter at the breakfast table, or the way her eyes lingered on June a moment longer when she laughed. Trust was a slow thaw, but it was beginning. One evening, Beckett was chopping carrots in the kitchen when Willa came in, holding a book. "It's missing pages," she said simply, handing him the tattered copy of Charlotte's Web from the bookshelf. He looked it over. Sure enough, pages 91 through 96 had been torn out. "I can fix it," he said. "Might take a few days." "I can wait," Willa replied, and then, unexpectedly, added, "Thank you." It wasn't just gratitude. It was invitation. That same night, after the dishes were washed and the children tucked in, Beckett stepped outside to breathe in the quiet. The air was sharp, almost metallic with cold, but it cleared his mind. In the distance, snow fell like sifted flour through the trees. Then came the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A familiar dark sedan pulled into the drive, and Lainey stepped out, coat wrapped tight, cheeks flushed from the cold. Beckett met her on the porch, surprised but not unsettled. "I got a letter," she said simply, holding it up like a fragile treasure. "From June." He raised an eyebrow. "What did she write?" "She asked me not to take her family away." Something shifted in Beckett's chest, a mix of pride, humility, and a sting of protectiveness. "I didn't ask her to write anything." "I know," Lainey said. "That's what makes it matter more." They stood in silence for a moment, the cold air swirling between them. "I filed a provisional report," she continued, "the kind that says, 'Situation stable, reassess in 60 days. "And after 60 days? She smiled. "That's up to you." Lainey looked toward the window, where June and Willa were now peeking through the curtains, giggling behind cupped hands. "You're doing more than keeping them warm," she added. "You're giving them back something most people don't notice when it's gone." "What's that?" he asked. Lainey met his eyes. "Belonging." Later that night, after Lainey had gone, Beckett sat down at the kitchen table and unfolded June's carbon copy of the letter. She had given it to him quietly, like passing a secret. He read it once, then again. And on the third read, he cried. Not the kind of cry that comes from fear or exhaustion, but the kind that sneaks up from the very root of you. The kind you don't even know you've been holding back until the dam finally breaks. He wept not just for Willa, or Micah, or June. He wept for Hannah. For the years he thought were empty. For the house he thought could never be full again. And for the miracle he hadn't realized was growing right under his roof. The old shed behind the house had long been forgotten, half buried in snow, its hinges rusted, its roof sagging like tired shoulders. But Beckett stood before it that morning with new eyes. Inside the shed was everything he had once been: clamps, chisels, worn wooden mallets. Beneath a thick layer of dust lay the lathe that had shaped June's crib, the rocking chair Hannah had rocked her in. For years, Beckett hadn't opened the door. The memories had been too sharp, but now, something softer stirred in him. Not sorrow, but possibility. He pulled on his gloves and pried the door open. The scent hit him immediately. Pine shavings, motor oil, and the faintest trace of Hannah's lavender soap still clinging to the scarf she'd left behind on a nail. It was as if time had paused inside, waiting for him to come back and finish something. And this time, he would. At breakfast, June noticed the sawdust on his sleeves. "You're building again," she said between bites of scrambled eggs. Beckett smiled. "Thinking about it." "What are you going to make?" He paused, spoon midair. "A home." June tilted her head. "We already have one." Beckett looked over at Willa and Micah, seated side by side, still hesitant but present. He nodded slowly. "We do. But now we're going to make it stronger." Beckett started small. A broken cabinet door, a wobbly kitchen stool. The kind of repairs he used to breeze through without thought, now handled with care, not just to fix, but to renew. He brought Willa with him one afternoon, after noticing her hovering near the shed. She didn't say anything, but her fingers lingered on the wood, and her eyes tracked his hands as he planed the edge of a drawer. "Want to try?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't know how." "I didn't either when I started, but you've got good instincts." Willa stepped closer. He handed her the sandpaper. "Smooth with the grain," he said. She began slowly, carefully, her hand unsure at first, but growing steady. There was something sacred in that silence, the whisper of sand on wood, the unspoken agreement between two people choosing to trust the moment. Lainey stopped by that Friday, not in her official capacity, but with a tray of cinnamon rolls and a warmth in her eyes that Beckett hadn't known he missed until it returned. "You're turning this place into a sanctuary," she said, glancing at the new coat of paint on the porch and the repaired railing. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Trying to make it livable." "It's more than livable," she said, walking beside him toward the shed. "It's intentional." They stood in the doorway, looking in at the scattered tools, the half-finished bookshelf, the dust dancing in light beams. "I remember when you built June's crib," Lainey said. "Hannah called me just to tell me you cried when you finished staining it." Beckett smiled, sheepish. "I was proud and terrified. She said you smelled like cedar chips for 3 days. That sounds about right." Lainey turned to him, her voice gentler now. "You know, you're allowed to start again." He met her gaze. "I'm trying, one drawer at a time." She nodded, and then, after a moment, picked up a piece of sandpaper herself. The kids began leaving drawings in the shed. June's were of stick figures holding hands, flowers growing under clouds. Micah drew lopsided stars, his way of saying, "I feel safe." Willa, surprisingly, sketched a blueprint, an actual layout of a treehouse, complete with windows and a ladder. Beckett pinned it to the wall. "We'll build that in the spring," he said. "You promise?" Willa asked. He didn't blink. "I do." One night, after a long day of repairs and cold air and laughter that finally felt real, Beckett pulled out a dusty, unfinished project from the corner of the shed. A small wooden jewelry box he had once started for Hannah, never completed. The lid was half-carved. Inside, her initials had been penciled, but never etched. He stared at it for a long time. Then, instead of completing the old monogram, he reached for a fresh piece of wood and started a new box. No initials this time. Just space, possibility. He worked through the quiet evening, the sound of his chisel gentle, rhythmic, like breath. The next morning, Beckett placed the box on the kitchen table. It wasn't wrapped. It didn't need to be. Lainey walked in just as the coffee finished brewing, her cheeks pink from the wind. The kids were still upstairs. "What's this?" she asked, noticing the box. "A thank you," Beckett said, "for all the second chances you've given." She opened it. Inside was a smooth stone, small and pale, with one word carved into it. "Begin." Lainey looked up, eyes shining. "I thought," he said, voice low, "maybe it's time we stop mourning what we lost and start honoring what we're building." She didn't speak right away. Then, quietly, "I'd like that." The snow began falling just after sunset, not in heavy sheets like a storm, but gently, in fine, slow-drifting flakes that glimmered under the porch light like sifted lavender. Lainey had planned to stay just a little while. She'd come by with a box of donated winter clothes, planning to drop them off and leave. But when she stepped into the kitchen and saw June stirring hot cocoa with Micah and Willa pressing cookie dough into a tray beside Beckett, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the domesticity that surprised her. It was how naturally it all fit. The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, and the wood stove crackled softly in the corner. For a moment, Lainey didn't want to move, as if stepping deeper into the room might break the spell. "You're just in time," Beckett said, glancing up from the oven. "These are Hannah's oatmeal cookies, or her recipe anyway. We're hoping they still taste like her." Lainey smiled, taking off her coat. "I didn't realize you baked." "I didn't," he said, "until Willa told me it was unfair that she'd never had a homemade cookie." Willa, without looking up, muttered, "Still unfair if you burn them." Lainey laughed. She's got a point. After dinner, the power flickered once, then again. On the third flicker, it went out completely. The house fell into sudden stillness, the kind of silence that always followed the loss of hums and clicks we never knew we'd grown used to. Beckett lit a lantern from the emergency cabinet. June cheered. "Campfire night." Micah looked alarmed, until Lainey reassured him that it was just like pretend camping, only indoors. Willa, ever practical, asked for a flashlight and immediately began checking every window like she'd been trained to handle the apocalypse. "I'm not sure how long it'll be out," Beckett said, "but the fireplace is good, and I've got enough candles to fake a wedding ceremony if we wanted." Lainey raised an eyebrow. "That a proposal?" Beckett froze, then grinned, just enough to soften the line of his jaw. "If it is, it's very poorly timed." They gathered in the living room, June and Micah wrapped in blankets on the rug, Willa curled in the armchair with a book, and Beckett and Lainey side by side on the couch, each holding a warm mug. Snow fell outside like powdered lace. "This house," Lainey said softly, "it feels alive again." Beckett didn't answer at first. He stared into the fire, watching the flames lick the logs in slow motion. "It died when she did," he finally said. "Not all at once. Just a little more every day, until it was just walls and air. And now? Now there are drawings on the fridge, boots in the hallway, laughter I didn't put there." Lainey looked at him, the light casting gold across his face. "You brought it back." "No," he said, shaking his head. "They did. I just stopped locking the door." A long pause settled over them, not awkward, but sacred. Lainey turned her mug in her hands. "You know," she said, "after my father died, my mom used to sit at the window every night and talk to him." Beckett looked over, curious. "She'd whisper," Lainey continued. "Tell him how the garden was doing, whether I was sleeping, what groceries she'd bought. I thought it was strange at first, but now I get it. When someone is part of your everyday rhythm, silence becomes unbearable." Beckett nodded slowly. "I still talk to her sometimes, in my head, or when I can't sleep." "You think she hears?" "I don't know, but I think she'd approve of tonight." Lainey's smile flickered. "Yeah, I think she would too." The snow outside deepened. Midnight crept in quietly. Willa had fallen asleep with her book over her chest. Micah and June snored in matching rhythms on the floor, cheeks flushed from warmth and sugar. Beckett rose, grabbed a blanket, and gently draped it over Willa's shoulders. Lainey watched, something soft swelling in her chest. He returned to the couch, sitting a little closer this time. She didn't move away. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" he asked. Lainey thought about that for a long moment. "No, not anymore. I used to. But if I went back, I might miss all of this." He nodded. "Yeah, I get that." "Beckett," she said quietly. What you're doing, it's more than kindness. It's rebuilding from the inside out. I don't know what it is, honestly. I just know it feels right." Lainey looked at him, eyes deep and clear. That's all love ever is. In the dim glow of the firelight, with lavender snow drifting past the window and the sound of 3 children sleeping nearby, Beckett and Lainey leaned in, foreheads nearly touching. No declarations. No urgency. Just the gentle, unspoken understanding that something had begun. Something true. Something quietly, powerfully whole. The morning of the hearing arrived colder than usual, the kind of cold that settles into your bones and makes you second-guess every decision. Beckett stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tying his one decent tie, navy blue with a barely visible stripe, and trying to calm the quiet storm building in his chest. Downstairs, Lainey waited with a manila folder tucked beneath her arm and a cup of coffee in each hand. She looked composed, professional, and, when their eyes met, softly determined. "They'll listen," she said, handing him a cup. "You just have to speak from where it's real." Beckett nodded. "And if they say no? Then we find another way." The drive to the courthouse was silent except for the hum of the heater and the occasional squeak of windshield wipers brushing away snowflakes. Willa and Micah sat in the back seat beside June, all 3 dressed in their best. Willa clutched the small wooden box Beckett had made for her, a simple keepsake she'd filled with scraps of drawings and a picture of her mother. Micah clung to his sister's hand like a lifeline. Beckett caught Lainey glancing in the mirror at them. "They shouldn't have to go through this," she said under her breath. "No," Beckett agreed. "But if we do it right, they'll never have to again." The hearing room was small, just a rectangle with dull gray carpeting, worn chairs, and a podium that had seen too many broken families. A judge sat at the front, expression neutral, pen tapping lightly on a stack of files. On the left sat a woman from Child Services, who Beckett had never met, clipboard resting in her lap, eyes sharp but not unkind. Laney motioned for Beckett and the kids to sit. Willa sat between him and June, her shoulders rigid. Micah swung his legs, too small to reach the floor, the oversized jacket swallowing his arms. Beckett's hand rested gently on his knee. Then the judge cleared her throat. Case file 44B27. Langford children. Willa and Micah. Petition of temporary guardianship by Mr. Beckett Cole. Laney stood first, composed and crisp. Your Honor, she began, I've been with Child Services for over 12 years. I've seen every kind of placement. Good, bad, and heartbreaking. What I witnessed in the Cole home is none of those. It is healing. It is human. It is what we hope for and rarely find. She outlined the timeline, the emergency situation, the note under the bus seat, Beckett's decision to act, the stable conditions since the children arrived, the gradual emotional recovery. Then came the moment Beckett dreaded. The judge turned to him. Mr. Cole, do you have anything to say on your behalf? He stood slowly. His hands were steady, but his voice wavered for half a second before finding its anchor. I'm not a perfect man, he began, but I know what it means to lose someone. I know what silence feels like after a death. I've lived in it, and I recognized it in Willa and Micah. He looked down, then back at the judge. I didn't plan for any of this. I just saw two children who needed a warm place to sleep. I gave them that. But it's turned into something more. He glanced at June, who smiled with quiet encouragement. They've given me more than I could ever give back, a reason to build again, to believe again. I'm not here to prove I'm the best option. I'm here because I love them, and I'm willing to fight for them. Silence followed. Then the judge looked over her papers. Her voice was calm, measured. There is concern, she said, that this arrangement began outside of standard procedure. Mr. Cole is not licensed, trained, or vetted in the traditional sense. Technically, he bypassed every safeguard. Laney opened her mouth, but the judge held up a hand. That said, I also believe the system exists not to protect policies, but to protect people. And sometimes, rules must bow to compassion. She turned to the children. Willa, would you like to speak? Willa's eyes widened. She looked at Beckett. He nodded gently. She stood slowly. Her voice was soft, but clear. When my mom died, I didn't know what to do. I thought if I told anyone, they'd take Micah and put him somewhere I couldn't go. Her fingers gripped the edge of the box in her lap. So I wrote a note. I didn't even think anyone would see it. But he did. She looked at Beckett. And when he found us, he didn't ask for anything. He didn't yell or call anyone. He just said, "You're not alone anymore." And he meant it. She took a deep breath. I don't want to leave again. Not ever. The judge nodded, then looked at Micah. Anything to say, young man? Micah stood on the seat and said very seriously, I like our new house. It has pancakes. And Dad Beckett makes animal voices when we read. The judge laughed, the entire room easing with the sound. 15 minutes later, it was done. Temporary guardianship approved. A formal review set in 60 days, but Laney whispered that it was just a formality now. As they left the courthouse, snow still falling softly around them, Willa slipped her hand into Beckett's. Thank you, she said. He squeezed her hand back. Welcome home. The week after the hearing felt like breathing for the first time after being underwater too long. There were still papers to sign, forms to file, and meetings on calendars that Laney kept track of. But the home itself, the spirit of it, shifted. It was subtle at first, like the light falling warmer through the kitchen window, or the way Willa no longer flinched when someone laughed too loud. One night, Beckett stood outside the girl's bedroom, hand on the doorknob, listening. June's voice floated through the door. And then the princess said, "I'm not locked in the tower. I'm just not ready to leave yet." There was a pause, then something Beckett hadn't heard from Willa since the day he met her. Laughter. Soft, brief, and slightly unsure, but laughter nonetheless. Beckett stepped back, his heart catching in his chest like it had been waiting for that exact moment. The next day, Beckett returned to the shed. He had a project in mind, a reading nook for the girls, complete with a little bookshelf, cushions, and a window ledge wide enough to sit on. As he measured the planks, Willa appeared in the doorway. "You're building something again," she said. He looked up, startled, not by her presence, but by her tone. It was clear, steady, almost playful. "I am," he replied. "Want to help?" She nodded and walked in, brushing sawdust off the workbench. "Do you know what you're doing?" she asked, crossing her arms with a smirk. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you questioning the architect of the best grilled cheese sandwich on Oak Hill Road?" She laughed again, easier this time, and picked up the sandpaper. "I just don't want the bookshelf to collapse." "Noted." They worked together in comfortable silence, passing tools, exchanging dry jokes. Every now and then, Beckett caught her glancing toward the doorway, not in fear, but as if expecting someone else to walk in. Finally, he asked, "Do you miss her? Your mom?" Willa didn't answer at first. Then she said, "Every morning, and every night, but less in the middle." "In the middle?" She nodded. "When I'm here, when I'm helping, when Micah laughs, that's the middle." Beckett swallowed hard. The middle's a good place to be. That evening, a storm moved in. Not harsh, but heavy enough to cancel school and keep everyone home. June turned it into a celebration. "Snow day!" she shouted, throwing open the linen closet to retrieve every blanket they owned. They built a fort in the living room, a tangled, beautiful chaos of sheets, pillows, and couch cushions. Inside, Micah brought his dinosaur books, June supplied flashlights, and Willa, to everyone's surprise, brought her sketchbook. Beckett peeked in. "Room for one more," June pointed sternly. "Only if you bring snacks." An hour later, they sat under the makeshift roof, all 5 of them, illuminated by warm yellow flashlight beams and the smell of popcorn. "Tell a story," June said. "A made-up one." Beckett glanced around. "I'm out of stories." "No, you're not," Willa said. He looked at her. "You have a shed full of stories," she continued. "You just carve them into wood instead of paper." There was silence, not the heavy kind, the kind filled with awe. Then June whispered, "She's talking so much." Willa rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Later that night, Beckett sat at the kitchen table, filling out a form Lainey had emailed him, another step toward formal guardianship. Willa walked in, holding her sketchbook. "Can I show you something?" He set the pen down. "Always." She flipped it open to a page near the middle, a pencil drawing, detailed and expressive. It was their living room, the couch, the fireplace, the bookshelf, but drawn with warmth, almost like it had breath. In the center were 5 figures: Beckett, June, Micah, Willa, and Lainey standing by the window, coffee mug in hand. "I call it home," she said quietly. Beckett studied the image. "You're really good." "I used to draw houses I wanted to live in," she said. "Now, I just draw the one I have." He blinked, throat thickening. Willa looked up at him. "Do you think it's okay to be happy?" He didn't rush to answer. "I think," he said slowly, "when you survive something hard, it takes a while to believe that good things won't disappear too. But yes, I think it's okay. Especially here. Especially now." She smiled, and then, without hesitation, leaned in to hug him. It was the first time she had initiated touch since she arrived. Beckett didn't speak. He just held her, gently protectively, and with the quiet reverence of someone who knew how sacred second chances could be. The first thaw came slowly, like a secret the earth was whispering. The snow didn't melt in great floods or dramatic sheets. It softened around the edges, dripping from rooftops, revealing patches of brown grass, like the land itself was waking up from a long, aching sleep. Beckett noticed it one morning as he stood on the porch, coffee in hand. The old planter boxes under the kitchen window, warped and weathered, had begun to emerge from beneath the ice. Beside them, a faded wooden stake still stood in the soil, bearing a chipped label from years ago. Lavender, Hannah's side. It stopped him cold. He hadn't thought of the garden in a long time, not since the last spring before Hannah's accident. She had drawn plans on napkins, sketched trellises on old receipts, talked about soil quality and sun exposure, with the fierce intensity of someone who believed that beauty could start from seeds. But after she died, the garden became just another thing that withered. He let it go wild. Or rather, he let it disappear. Until now. Later that afternoon, Beckett gathered the children on the porch. The air was still crisp, but the ground was soft enough to turn. "We're going to start something today," he said, kneeling in the dirt. "Something your mom always wanted." June leaned forward. "You mean the lavender?" Beckett nodded. "She wanted a garden that would last," he said. "Even after she didn't." Micah raised his hand solemnly. "Will there be bees?" "Yes," Beckett said. "And butterflies. And worms. All the good stuff." Micah blinked. "Okay. I'm in." Willa sat quietly for a moment before asking, "Do you think she'd be okay with me helping?" Beckett looked her in the eyes. She would have loved that. They began with shovels and gloved hands, clearing out the old beds, pulling weeds that had turned to threadbare ghosts over the years. The kids worked in pairs, laughter rising between them. Even Lainey, who had stopped by to drop off paperwork, stayed and knelt in the dirt in her office slacks, sleeves rolled up and cheeks smudged with soil. Beckett planted the lavender first, 2 new starters and a scattering of seed, just the way Hannah had planned. He placed them in the box she'd labeled near the kitchen window, where she used to hum while washing dishes. Then came the marigolds, the snapdragons, the wildflower mix that June sprinkled with a solemnity that made the others pause and smile. They planted for hours. At dusk, Beckett lit the outdoor lantern and stepped back to look at the work they'd done. It wasn't finished. Not yet. But it was alive. "You know," Lainey said quietly, brushing dirt from her jeans, "this is the kind of love people never see coming." Beckett looked at her, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, "She used to talk about this garden like it was her gift to the future. She said if it bloomed, then she'd never really be gone." Lainey stepped closer. She was right. They stood side by side, looking out at the garden beds. Crooked rows, uneven lines, patches of chaos. It was perfect. Later that night, June curled up beside Beckett on the porch swing, a blanket over their laps, steam rising from 2 mugs of mint tea. "Do you think she saw it?" June asked. Beckett looked at the garden, the moonlight painting silver outlines on the new sprouts. "I do," he said, "and I think she sees you too." June nodded. "I wrote her a letter." Beckett's heart lifted and sank at once. "You did?" "I left it in the soil, with the seeds. What did you say?" June rested her head against his arm. "I told her, thank you." Beckett closed his eyes for a moment, overcome by the simplicity, the rightness of it. Thank you for what? For starting a garden that could grow even after she wasn't here. Inside, Willa placed a small sketch on the windowsill above the sink, her own version of the garden as it would look in full bloom. Lavender pouring over the box edges, sunflowers towering in the back, bees hovering, petals open like hands reaching for light. Micah added his drawing, too, a lavender plant with a smiling face and sunglasses. Beckett saw them and smiled. This was not the family he had planned. It was the family he had been given. And maybe, just maybe, that was better. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It tiptoed into Oak Hill like a secret returning home. One warm breeze, one bird call, one stubborn crocus at a time. Beckett stood at the edge of the garden, now budding with life. The lavender was pushing up through the soil, green shoots stretching toward the sky as if they remembered the hands that once planned their place in the world. Alongside them, the marigolds whispered their way into bloom, and the wildflowers, planted without pattern, began to sketch color into the earth like paint on canvas. The house behind him buzzed with Saturday morning energy. June's voice floated through the window, narrating a puppet show for Micah. Willa was in the shed, sanding the final edge of the treehouse model she and Beckett had started weeks ago. The sun poured across the yard like forgiveness. It was, in every way that mattered, a new beginning. That afternoon, Beckett retrieved a small wooden sign from the shed. He had carved it in secret over several evenings, the words etched slowly, with reverence. He called the kids outside, Lainey included. They followed him to the garden, curious, barefoot on warm grass. He planted the sign in the earth at the center of the flower beds, just beneath the growing lavender. The sign read, "Home is where love never leaves. HRC. June tilted her head. What's the R for? Hannah's middle name, Beckett said softly. Rose. Lainey reached for his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Willa placed her sketchbook beside the sign, open to the drawing she'd made of the future garden. Micah plopped a small plastic dinosaur at the base like a guardian. It was their way of saying, we remember. And we continue. That evening, Lainey stayed for dinner. Not as a guest, not as a caseworker, but as someone who belonged. She brought fresh bread and a bottle of sparkling cider. The kids set the table without being asked. June even used the mismatched cloth napkins Hannah had sewn years ago and saved in the back of the drawer. After dinner, as twilight settled in, Lainey and Beckett stood in the kitchen, the sink full of dishes and the world soft around them. You've done more than build a home, she said, rinsing a plate. You've built a life that holds. He dried the plate and looked at her. It's not just mine anymore. No, she agreed. It's ours. There was no big declaration, no dramatic kiss, just a quiet look between them, the kind that holds more than words could ever carry. The next morning, Beckett found a note on the kitchen table. Not tucked under a seat or scribbled in desperation. This one was neatly folded, written in careful print. Dear Dad Beckett, thank you for not being scared of the quiet parts of me. Thank you for letting me build with you, even when I was still broken. You helped plant something in me, too. Love. Willa Beckett read the note 3 times before folding it and placing it gently in the box he'd once started for Hannah, the same one that had sat unfinished in the shed for years. He didn't add anything to it. He didn't need to. It was full now. Not with sorrow, but with what came after. Weeks later, on a golden April morning, the treehouse was finished. Beckett stood on the ladder as Willa hammered the last nail. June tied a ribbon to the railing. Micah named it the Flying Dinosaur Club, though Beckett wasn't sure what the bylaws were. Lainey brought lemonade, and for a while, they just sat, watching the children climb, laugh, and tell stories to each other, as if they'd always been siblings. As the wind rustled the new leaves overhead, Lainey turned to Beckett. Did you ever imagine this? No, he said, but I think Hannah might have. She would have loved them. I think she does, he replied, in ways we can't even measure. Lainey leaned her head on his shoulder. You know, you saved them. He shook his head gently. No, they saved me. That night, before bed, Beckett stood once more on the porch. The stars blinked gently above. The air carried the scent of lavender and earth and fresh wood. And somewhere deep inside, he no longer felt like a man surviving the aftermath. He felt like a man who had arrived, not at the place he'd planned, but at the place he was meant to be. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Share your city or country in the comments below. It's always a joy to see how far kindness and storytelling can reach. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to subscribe and stay with us. Here, every story is a quiet reminder that hope still lives, often where we least expect it. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your presence means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.